The following is an excerpt from The Ecstasy of Nothing on Language, Reality, and the Phenomenology of Modern Experience, written by James Riordan Waters. This is the prologue, and the entire book can be read for free on OpenSea.io and bought as a non-fungible token, gratefully provided and supported by Whip Publishing and the Libernet. Prologue. I can pinpoint a series of events that would inspire me to write this book. When I was a young child, I was very imaginative, but my fever dreams were especially vivid. In the moments before slipping into unconsciousness, I would be forced awake by hallucinations that took place in my mind's eye. These hallucinations would come in many forms, such as visions of a canvas needing to be cleaned up by thick and viscous brushes that served to fill the canvas up with colour or clean the dirt. Its vividness for a child was disturbing, but not as disturbing as the fever dreams themselves. The dreams would consist of some impossible task that needed to be done, such as feeding an entire population of people before a timer ran out. My mother would frequently come into the room to a manic 8-year-old boy that would not recognize her or have a way of explaining what was happening. It was soon after that I celebrated my mother's 40th birthday. This came with the realization that she was going to die. As if I somehow wasn't aware of this fact, I soon realized that I was going to die too. This desperate attachment to what I considered my life gave me a lot of fear, a fear natural to most in partiality. However, this fear for me was so particularly insane, you would have thought me as deluded, as though I was going to die next week. These fears dissipated and would come back to me later and later in life, evolving each time. By 17, I had in my head the dichotomic problem of eternalism and nihilism as some great problem that needed solving, determined that the answer was one or the other, but concealed by some metaphysical entity. We could never know which one it was, and it certainly couldn't be both. These would come accompanied with similar existential questions of identity, causation, free will, meaning, and love, questions that would all shake me and unrest me. The teachings of Zen Buddhism, Taoism, and later the ideas and uncompromising charm of Alan Watts did me an incredible amount of good in relieving these tensions. They taught me of non-dualism, of conceptual opposites, and the fundamental nature of perceiving reality for how it really was. However, this would become a new obsession of mine, attempting to reach the state of enlightenment, or nirvana, or truth, that the Buddhists, Taoists, and mystics sought and advocated. As I decided to soak in the general ideas of the Western philosophies, I had found that some of their conclusions had rubbed me up the wrong way. There was something missing that I valued so much from the Eastern philosophies, but alas, I was naive, uneducated, and had no articulation to express my distaste. It was when I was 20 and discovered Wittgenstein that I had found someone who understood the semantic paradoxes of the metaphysicians and moralists of the West. Above all, to me, he was a philosopher to take seriously the problems of language. It was by then that I was already sketching out an idea of what this book could look like. And after reading both of his books, I saw that Wittgenstein was able to express something that I felt, but could never articulate. However, this would come after 2 points in my life which would give the story of my life a sharp trajectory to the left, the largest I would ever have. My dabbling with recreational drugs would lead me in August to get spiked with liquid LSD, and by November I had a form of psychosis. 1 year later it would be confirmed during my time living in Finland by the psychiatrists and English interpreters they would hire at our meetings that I had HPPD, or hallucinogenic persisting perception disorder, with a chronic tendency to experience psychosis that would likely last the rest of my life. The experience I had on psychedelics was, in a way, here to stay. Where my depersonalization and derealization were already haunting me in my teenagerhood, the symptoms of HPPD and chronic psychosis would come in full form. They would be characterized by complete dissociation from original ideas of self, an intense connectedness of everything, the absolute saturation of colors and shapes of things, and occasional voices that would chatter like a detuned radio. The majority of experiences with the illness, however, would be indescribable. I kept a diary, and it was apparent years later reading it how much I wished for death. By then, I had lived mostly on my own in a large empty house near Canterbury, and all I had was the internet and my thoughts. And it was shortly after I turned 20 that I had the experience of enlightenment, the most important experience of my life. What was the experience of enlightenment? It was a creeping, eerie sensation to begin with. The creeping sensation began slowly, walking home. I let whatever was happening to me happen, and when it did, it was as if I saw my entire universe at once. The trees shone a brilliant light, the tiles of the house shone a brilliant light, and this brilliant light of reality shone into my perception like diamonds. My incoherent diary ramblings were at the time the closest ideas I'd ever had. What I'd felt prior to such a wondrous experience was too so clear. The dominance of the lingual and the conceptual, as opposed to this wondrous reality it represented. My experience was about seeing. Not what you see, but to have the ability to perceive, to see it all. It would later come to me through this that the visions and dreams I had as a child were concepts and language enacting itself into abstract diagrams of this and that, and the tasks that could never be completed in my dreams were parallel to the tasks associated with our unrest with the world we think we know. The world had no mistakes within it, and it was all unified, all whole, and the experience of indescribable, intricate, and pure beauty and freedom would later give me the title of my book. This is a philosophy book written to be inclusive to both those well-read in philosophy and those who aren't. It is meant to be as simple as it is meaningful. It is also a non-continuous book, which means that it shouldn't be vital for you to read each statement I make after the last. Rather, this book is a series of interconnected paragraphs, so while reading it in a linear fashion would give you best insight into everything spoken of, if a chapter or page or part bores you or confuses you, such as the first part, which is the most technical of the book, you may skip ahead to the next part, chapter, subchapter, or paragraph. I very much encourage you to not let the more technical parts of the book put you off, especially a theory of dimensions, as this chapter intends to clarify and make vivid the structure of concepts in the mind and the falsity of assumptions. If these chapters bore you, please move on. You will still find continuity and find yourself engaging successfully with the book. This is a book dedicated to attempting to understand concepts, language, reality, and the modern human experience. However, it is as much a spiritual and personal book as it is a rational and philosophical one. While this book specializes in what the subtitle implies, language, reality, and the phenomenology of modern experience, this book intends to be the start of a conversation. Therefore, this book intends to approach this particular line of thought from as many angles as possible. Thus, I open up many points of inquiry throughout this book into the various ways my philosophy of non-conceptualism and conceptuology may be applied. I give exposition into what I believe corresponds to universal functions of mature language and the sociocultural products which may have partially stemmed from such universal functions in the lingual instinct. I attempt to make every paragraph as riveting as possible while remaining as concise as it can be. However, some chapters will be more drawn out to make proper conclusions. If you want more colourful and to-the-point chapters that illustrate the point of the book, I would recommend The Chaining of Concepts, where I go over the ways we are bound to certain conceptualizations, Genealogies of Knowledge, where I discuss how the conceptualizations of our knowledge are relative and so may be mastered, and the title chapter, On the Ecstasy of Nothing, where I talk about the experience of what this book's definition of nothing is, a glimpse into the absolute and wondrous state of the real. I also recommend Folk Philosophy, the final chapter, where I refer to the philosophies of the lived, the unlived, and unspoken, the integrity that most life on earth follows. There are many discoverable combinations to the mapping out of ideas in this book, from the several universal functions to what I call the major concepts, to the origins of words, to the exercise of the autonomous will. These, especially the universal functions and implications of the major concepts, may be cross-examined. I do not write everything I imply, for I feel it is unnecessary and those with further inquiries may do it themselves. I do my best to not write large words, especially for the sake of sounding intellectual. However, if many words in this book confuse you, or if you do not fully understand the meaning of them, or you want more detailed insight into what they mean as written in this book, I have included a glossary at the end. There you may get a further insight into my personal definitions of words, esoteric and never before heard. I also give definitions for words I have formed exclusively for this book, as the words I wish to use do not exist. And finally, while I am the most challenged I have ever been in my life, I write this book as a culmination of things that led me to be the most knowledgeably content, happy, and free I ever have been too. In the current situation of viral outbreaks, environmental devastation, fear of nuclear annihilation, accumulation of mindless consumerism, global terrorism, political disparity, and war, my love for the world remains. It remains because I know that the world has hardly anything to do with such silly notions that we humans are faced with, and I know that the world, and subsequently the world of the real, is the place of virtue, wonder, and the sublime. Such a world has existed before us, will exist after us, and, if we pay close attention, is the majority of what makes us up too. The process of writing this book has taught me of such a world existing, and existing higher than any notion of misfortune we have or ever will have, and this is what has led to my greatest happiness. Wishing you great joy, freedom, and other virtues through experiencing this book in physical, digital, audio, or verbal form. James.